At least 215 people have been wounded in the latest outbreak of violence in and around the Al-Aqsa mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli security forces fired tear gas and stun grenades at Palestinian protesters who hurled stones and other objects in return. Already simmering tensions are being further inflamed by a planned march later on Monday by right-wing Israeli nationalists for an event they call Jerusalem Day. Well, there have also been explosions of stun grenades and tear gas inside Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's understood that people were staging a sit-in protest and security forces attempted to clear them. Palestinians said they wanted to guard the mosque ahead of the nationalist march. Well, the Palestinian Red Crescent says its team is being prevented from reaching the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound with aid. 88 people have been taken to hospital. Live now to Harry Fawcett, who joins us from there. Harry, we've seen those rather alarming pictures of the Israeli forces storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Just talk us through this morning's events. What exactly happened?
Well, we know that there were thousands of people who stayed in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound overnight. That is not atypical in the last days of Ramadan, that people from around Palestinian Israeli towns and also from within East Jerusalem will do that. But obviously, at the moment, the state of tension within the Old City and within occupied East Jerusalem more generally is extremely high. There were obviously a lot of Israeli security forces massed around the site, and something triggered the events that we're seeing unfold. Now, the Israeli officials, Israeli security forces are saying that that there were rocks thrown at Israeli police positions and indeed onto the road around the Old City, and that is when they moved in. We've spoken to one witness who was there at the scene, an activist who says that there were Israeli security forces with rubber-coated steel bullet guns who suddenly appeared and started firing. It's not clear precisely whether they were doing so after stone throwing, but that is what seems to have been the initial moments of what then turned into an extremely serious situation in the compound, with police coming in huge numbers, firing tear gas, especially into the area around the Dome of the Rock, which is where most of the female worshippers were. We've seen stun grenades, use of rubber-coated steel bullets, injuries to the face and the eyes of several people, at least 8 journalists injured. We've also seen video of police backing people away very aggressively, and in one instance appearing to fire a rubber-coated steel bullet directly at very close range into the leg of one of the people they were trying to disperse. Also video of people being held and then being beaten by Israeli security forces. So it's that they're extremely concerning videos and also concerning numbers. As you say, more than 200 people injured, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. They say one of their own medics was injured and was in critical condition as a result of that injury. It doesn't take much for this really to spin out of control, especially if we start seeing anybody dying from what has taken place so far or what could take place in the hours ahead. One other concerning video, that of a car being driven by a Jewish man just outside the walls of the Old City in occupied East Jerusalem. He appears to come under attack by Palestinian stone throwers. The car then swerves and knocks one of those Palestinians over extremely violently. And then there are further attempts to throw stones before there are what appears to be shots fired by him into the air. It just shows that when people get in close proximity, Jews and Palestinians, at times like this, things can really get out of control very quickly.
They certainly can. Harry, how bad do you think this has the potential to get? Because this is all taking place at a time of heightened tension, but also on the so-called Jerusalem Day, a day which is quite provocative for many people living in the city.
Well, yes, that's right. I mean, even when there aren't the current level of tensions, Jerusalem Day, as it's known to Israeli Jews, is an extremely high-pressure event requiring a lot of Israeli security forces' presence and putting on the Palestinian residents, especially of the Muslim quarter of the Old City, a great deal of pressure as well. What it commemorates, as far as Israelis are concerned, is what they call the unification of Jerusalem in 1967, what for Palestinians who live here represents the beginning of the Israeli occupation in this half of the city and, of course, more widely across the Palestinian territories. On this day, the question is whether the Israeli security forces are going to inhibit at least some of the route of that march, put in restrictions to prevent close proximity between Jews and Palestinians. They would usually march through the Muslim quarter, waving flags, dancing, chanting, shouting, banging on shut Muslim owners' shops. And if that takes place today, then as we've just seen, already there have been very violent events that could trigger even further such events. The Israeli police commissioner said as late as Sunday night that he wanted things to go ahead as they traditionally do. However, there is meant to be a decision made early Monday. We're still waiting to hear the official decision as to whether they're going to allow it to go ahead in its full form or whether they're going to place restrictions. In either event, it'll be tense.
It will indeed. Harry Fawcett there reporting live for us at the Al-Aqsa compound. Thank you, Harry, for now. Well, let's stay in occupied East Jerusalem. We can hear now from Ines Abdelrazak, an advocacy director for the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. It's good to have you with us here on the programme. You've been down at the Al-Aqsa site. Just tell us what you've been seeing. Hello, Ines, can you hear us? Ines Abdelrazak.
Yes.
Hi there. I was just telling our viewers that you've been down at the site. You've been at the Al-Aqsa compound. Give us a sense of what you've been seeing when you were there.
Look, we cannot talk about clashes between two parties or tensions. This is clearly repression by heavy armed occupation force against unarmed worshippers and people who are just trying to protest. So this is the situation, and as you can see, there is a lot of injured. We also saw that the paramedics were prevented to access the site. There was a clinic that was attacked also by stun bombs. So it's dramatic, but it's not happening in a vacuum.
It's not at all. Do you think then that the Israeli response to whatever the Israeli forces were responding to, do you think is disproportionate then?
Israel's response is always disproportionate. We're talking here about Jerusalemites, Palestinians, who have been repeatedly told since generations that this city is for the Israelis and the Jewish only. They are born with inferior rights. They are constantly under pressure, repressed, oppressed. So sometimes it bursts, and I think it won't go away, even if tomorrow it doesn't make the headlines in the media, given the, the amplitude. It's clearly a problem that will stay because Palestinians are not, are denied their fundamental rights in this city. And the Israelis have emboldened the settlers, and they are also emboldened by constant impunity.
Well, there's a clear sense of injustice there for people who are living in this situation. But just in terms of the visuals now, you're a Palestinian. How did it make you feel when you saw stun grenades, tear gas being fired inside the mosque itself, one of the holiest sites in Islam? How did that make you feel? Angry, but we're not surprised because, again, this is not the first time and it won't be the last time. You can see that the Israeli forces, they consider the Palestinians in front of them as a security threat, as a demographic threat, not as human beings, as citizens with rights. We are considered a threat. And I think this is overall how Israel's system functions, whether it's the legislative, the executive, or
the armed forces. This is a system. It's a sophisticated system. It's not only, just a few policemen. These policemen receive orders, and they have been elected and trained, and elected officials have, supported such action. So again, this not comes as a surprise. This is decades of education, mentality, and political and policy practices.
Given this, how do you think the international community should be regarding all of this? Because whenever there is unrest of this type, there are usually calls for calm on both sides here. And as you pointed out, one side has rocks and empty bottles, the other side has rubber bullets and tear gas canisters. How do you think the international community watching these images should be responding to this? I mean,
starting by reframing that narrative, we can't continue to both sides, what's happening. It's not a both sides issue. There is an occupier, an occupied. There's a colonizer and a colonized. And unfortunately, the international community has not recognized that. And so they're always making false equivalences. And these false equivalences prevent us to move forward towards a just future. So the only solution now is accountability. Israel has never been held accountable for its continuous violations of international law and human rights. And let's repeat it, what they're doing in Jerusalem, whether it's the forced expulsions or what they're doing in Al-Aqsa, is war crimes. And it can amount to crimes against humanity, including the crime of apartheid. And this has been analyzed. So the response should be accountability and actions, because declarations are not enough.
Well, do you think Palestinians will ever get this accountability? Do you think this will ever come?
Yes, I'm hopeful, and Palestinians, again, they won't go away, and they won't, I think, back down. They will continue to mobilize. So I would urge also the media to continue to look when there is not this outburst of violence, because often, and most often, the violence of the occupation and the colonial aspects of where we live is underlined, is continuous, and is of low intensity, but low intensity doesn't make it to media headlines. So I think there is a root cause to all of this. We need to address the root causes. Without addressing the root causes, this will continue, and Palestinians will continue to be killed and injured, and will continue to mobilize.
Okay, Ines Abdelrazak there, joining us from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.